On the morning of June 23rd in 2021, a young man named Daniel Robinson was driving home from work through a desert in Arizona when he mysteriously disappeared. After failing to make it home that day, Daniel was eventually reported missing by his father, David Robinson, after the local police insisted that he wait 12 hours before officially making the claim. The investigation therefore started the next day, however they wouldn't find any evidence until almost 1 month later, when Daniel's car was finally discovered on a ranch 3 miles away, crashed and abandoned, with the airbags deployed. Surprisingly, however, there was still no sign of Daniel, and after 2 years of searching, the police are still no closer to finding out what really happened to the 24-year-old geologist. Many theories have been discussed, but with this case being so tightly guarded by the Buckeye Police Department, Daniel's father fears we may never get to the bottom of this mystery. However, recent missing person cases such as Jared Shadid and Johannes Kadani seem to have rekindled the search for Daniel Robinson. In fact, in recent years there have been many more instances of young professional African Americans disappearing under suspicious circumstances, which has led many to wonder, are all these incidents of people mysteriously going missing just tragic accidents, or is there something more nefarious at play? Daniel Robinson was born on the 19th of January in 1997 to his soldier father David Robinson II and mother Melissa Edmonds. A unique fact about Daniel is that he was actually born without part of his right arm, which left him partially disabled his entire life. But by all accounts, he never let this disability keep him down, and somehow always managed to maintain a positive mindset. Not much more is known about his childhood, but we do know that after graduating from college in 2019, Daniel almost immediately landed a career as a field geologist and decided to move to Phoenix, Arizona to chase his dreams. He had attended the College of Charleston, achieving a major in archaeology. He then attended a course in Tucson and soon after was offered a job by the engineering firm Matrix New World. Part of his job was to oversee and assess remote sites that were situated in desert locations, where he would often work in extreme conditions. He would also have to travel long distances to work on certain projects. However, this was never a problem for Daniel, as he always had an innate passion for adventure. One drawback to this particular passion was that Daniel was known to take spontaneous trips that could put him in relatively dangerous positions. But despite his impulsive nature, he always made sure to update his friends and family about his travel plans. That is until one fateful day in 2021, when he suddenly disappeared without a trace. On the 23rd of June, Daniel had been spending his morning assessing a remote drill site in the desert area of Sun Valley Parkway and Cactus Road. At the time, little was known about his current state of mind, but friends and family that spoke to him claimed that he had been acting slightly strange in the days building up to his disappearance. Anyway, his shift at the site eventually ended and he got back into his Jeep Renegade and was seen driving deeper into the desert, which would be the last time anybody would see Daniel Robinson. As the day soon turned to night, his father David quickly became worried, as he had planned to speak to his son after he returned home from work. So when Daniel failed to turn up, David immediately called the police to report his son missing, fearing the worst. After refusing to start the search until 12 hours had officially passed, the Buckeye PD eventually began looking and sent troops to the area he was last seen at to try and find some evidence of where he could be. They were able to uncover a witness named Ken Elliot, who was a co-worker of Daniel's, who claimed he saw him leave the worksite at around 9:15 to 9:30 am. According to Ken, Daniel was initially fine as they discussed the weather and the job at hand, but within a short period, he suddenly became seemingly distracted by something. The witness stated to the police he was just looking off into the desert. He had a very, very distant look in his eyes. Whenever he'd turn back around, I would look at him and look into his eyes. The first thing I thought was maybe he was on something, but his pupils were not dilated. Then I thought maybe this was a medical condition. I wasn't too sure. I kept watching him, but he just kept looking off into the desert, and then suddenly he just turned around and walked over to his Jeep. At the time, I just assumed he was going to get something out of his vehicle. But then he opened the door, got in, sat down, put on his seatbelt, then he looked at me one last time and just waved, before backing up the car and taking off. Ken later told his co-workers by phone about what had happened, assuming that Daniel wasn't feeling well and would call in sick. However, nobody heard from the young man after that moment. Ken later followed Daniel's Jeep tyre tracks in the rain-soaked dirt road and found that instead of going left at the T-junction to return to Phoenix, he instead turned right, heading deeper into the Sonoran Desert. So with Daniel's last known location to be somewhere in a vast desert, the Buckeye PD had a needle in a haystack situation on their hands. But they continued their investigation nonetheless, sending helicopters out approximately 3 days after his initial disappearance, and then finally, almost 1 month later on the 19th of July, a rancher found Daniel's Jeep rolled over on its side on a remote part of his property, with the airbags deployed. Evidence in the vehicle indicated that the driver was wearing a seatbelt at the time of the crash, and several personal items of Daniel's were found, such as his cell phone, wallet, keys, and clothes. Also, one of his boots was discovered lodged under the vehicle, but strangely, there was no sign of Daniel himself. Data in his cell phone placed it at the crash site at roughly 10:05 AM the morning he went missing, revealing that Daniel had likely driven his car directly from the worksite to the crash site within around 50 minutes. After searching the surrounding area, a human skull was found a few miles south of where his vehicle was recovered, but testing later indicated that the skull was not of Daniel's, and no additional human remains were recovered at that time. But after this major discovery, the Tempe Police Department also agreed to help out with the investigation, analysing Daniel's electronic devices, which included personal computers, a work computer, and his iPad. However, once again, they were still unable to uncover any useful findings. On the 16th of September, 1 month later, the Buckeye Police Department announced that they had worked with outside agencies to search over 70 square miles, with the assistance of cadaver dogs, drones, and helicopters, but continued to have no luck despite their efforts. Also, after the discovery of the Jeep, Daniel's father hired an accident reconstructionist and private investigator named Jeff McGrath, who suggested that the accident scene had apparently been staged. He stated that after the airbags deployed, the ignition was turned over 46 more times, and that there was an additional 11 miles on the car that registered after the car had crashed. Also, rather interestingly, investigators soon announced that Daniel had apparently been texting a woman he had recently met. The text messages showed that he visited her home several times unannounced, and the woman indicated that she was extremely uncomfortable with his actions. After this discovery, the police then commenced interviews with friends, family, and co-workers about Daniel possibly being devastated by the situation. But to their surprise, everybody interviewed told investigators that he was not unhappy by any means, so this lead eventually went cold. The next big update with the case was in November, when it was announced that a second set of human remains had been discovered while searching for Daniel. But results showed that the remains likely belonged to somebody of a different race, plus the rate of decomposition did not match the time of Daniel's disappearance, once again leading to a dead end in the case. But over the following months, there were a few more instances of possible evidence discoveries. On the 27th of January in 2022, officers received a tip that there were human remains located inside a well, half a mile north of where Daniel was last seen. This tip was especially crucial as witnesses claimed to see Daniel near a well on the day he disappeared, so police rushed over to the scene in the hopes they would finally be able to close the case. But unfortunately, the tip was later exposed as false, as no remains whatsoever were actually found at this well. It seemed like every piece of evidence the police would follow would always lead to a dead end, causing everybody invested in the case to become increasingly frustrated. Making matters worse, on the 18th of February, 3 weeks later, the Buckeye PD, working alongside the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, conducted another search, this time with more personnel and canine units, but once again, they were unable to find any evidence of Daniel's whereabouts, leaving the Robinson family extremely distraught. After this final unsuccessful search, the case seemed to grow cold yet again, with no more updates until around 16 months later, when the Buckeye Police Department would finally release a statement surrounding the mystery. On the 21st of June of this year, the Buckeye PD stated, "When our detectives extracted data from Daniel's Google searches in the week leading up to his disappearance, some searches stuck out, like 'Love changed me,' 'delete Instagram account,' and 'I'm okay to do things I hate.' This, along with his strange encounter with the woman he appeared to be infatuated with, seemed to point the police in the direction that Daniel may have planned to end his life in the Sonoran Desert due to the rejection. But Daniel's dad, David, clapped back immediately to say that he had only recently talked to his son on the phone and didn't hear anything alarming, later being quoted as saying, "He definitely did not display any mental health issues openly." Unfortunately, however, this was all the police were able to disclose to the public, which certainly didn't answer any questions and, if anything, created more. So, with the vast amounts of information available, what kind of conclusion can we draw here? Was this just a simple case of a mentally unstable man taking his own life due to a heartbreak? Or should we be looking into a potential suspect behind Daniel's mysterious disappearance? The fact is, there are arguments for both sides, but with no body to inspect and with the case now being over 2 years old, Daniel's safe return is looking highly improbable at this point. Nevertheless, it's vital we get to the bottom of this case, if anything, to provide the much needed closure for Daniel's family. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. So the main concern I have with this case is that Daniel's car was found almost 1 month later, crashed and abandoned, and yet there was no evidence of Daniel himself. It is presumed that he was driving at the time, but this cannot be verified. Plus, if Daniel was driving and got into an accident, surely he would have been found deceased in the car a month later. His family believe that this implies somebody else was driving the car and staged the crash to make it look like Daniel had died in a tragic accident. But my problem with this theory is that if this was the case, why wouldn't they have left Daniel's body in the car? It's possible a coyote or mountain lion, which are animals native to the Sonoran Desert, may have discovered the body first, as there was a period of about 26 days between the time he went missing and when the car was found. But saying this, wouldn't there be some evidence left at the scene, like claw marks or some wild animal DNA in and around the car? Anything is possible, I suppose, but with the evidence brought forward by Daniel's co-worker Ken Elliot, I can't help but feel there may have been something wrong with his mental state that day, which leads to the next theory, of Daniel intentionally disappearing. Now, whether or not the young man is still with us is up for debate, but given his strange behaviour at the worksite and his constant glares towards the vast desert, I can't help but feel he may have been planning something that day. Even family and friends claimed that Daniel was acting strange in the build-up to his disappearance, so it wouldn't be out of the question that the heartbroken man decided he wanted to escape his life once and for all. It's possible he organised the disappearance with somebody else, and together they set out to stage the crash site and then smuggle him out of the country. But to me, this just seems so far-fetched. Firstly, I can't imagine organising such a thing would be cheap, and Daniel was only 24 years old with 2 years of work experience, so where would he have got the money? Also, with his distinctive disability, I'm sure after 2 years there would have been some sighting of the young man, and yet nobody has even claimed to see him since he disappeared that day. So unfortunately, we are left with the alternative option of a possible plan to disappear permanently, with Daniel potentially struggling with his mental health, leading to a devastating conclusion. But if Daniel was planning to end his life that day, why would he have done it in such a crude fashion? I suppose it is possible it was an impulsive decision to veer off the road and crash into the ravine that the car was found in, and then maybe after regaining consciousness in the car and determined to carry out his plan, he then climbed out of the vehicle in search of a place to die. If this is true, however, why weren't his deceased remains found anywhere within the 70-mile radius of the crash site? There were several other remains discovered, but none of them were Daniel's. Well, a possible explanation for this is that many carnivores, including mountain lions, generally like to feed under some sort of cover, so they will tend to drag their food away from where they find it. They then consume the majority of the carcass and leave the rest for the buzzards and other carnivores, which collectively consume pretty much everything else. So maybe after collapsing somewhere in the remote desert, his remains were stolen and consumed by the local wildlife, leading to his permanent disappearance. Now, this is clearly a huge stretch of the imagination, but based on the evidence available, I can't see any other plausible reason as to why his body was never found. Unless, of course, the crash was staged by somebody else, and therefore we have a suspect on the loose that should be brought to justice once and for all. But in a case with practically no named suspects, who are we supposed to blame? Well, a very interesting post on Reddit explains that there is a possibility that none other than Ken Elliot himself, the key witness in this case, could be involved in a cover-up of sorts. The post reads, "Now, the company that Ken worked for was called Weber Water Resources, and he was a pump technician that was supposed to be the last person to see Daniel the day he disappeared. His story is heavily relied upon in the police report, despite its shaky details, which apparently seem to change every time he tells his story. On many occasions, he has switched up the time he met with Daniel, described different weather conditions, and even changed what they were talking about before Daniel mysteriously walked away. He also later added details that would help explain certain things at the scene of where they found the Jeep, like saying Daniel's boots were untied when he left the job site. That would conveniently help explain why they found a boot lodged under the vehicle. If Daniel had his shoes fully tied, it would have been much less likely to find one lodged under the Jeep. But saying this, what would Ken's motive be to fabricate this story? According to all reports, Ken had never met Daniel before that day, he wouldn't have any reason to make this up, and he seems like a nice guy who just can't seem to accurately remember the details of what happened that day. But in order to find the motive, you need to go back and look at Daniel's job once again as a geologist and Ken's job with Weber Water Resources. If Daniel had figured out some sketchy information that would shut some part of a project down, or potentially lose a contract for the water company in the future, Ken could be losing them a lot of money. Some people have even said that Ken actually owns a part of Weber Water Resources himself, and so if this is true, that would certainly provide a strong motive for making Daniel disappear. Daniel could have also figured out that this company was already involved in a cover-up regarding water rights, viability, bad water, and wanted to expose that, again leading to Ken having no choice but to get rid of him. Now, this Redditor doesn't personally think Ken was directly responsible for Daniel going missing. However, they do think he knows what happened to Daniel and was likely paid off to tell this story. They later added, "In the police report, the detail about the boot is added by a Detective Biffin as he is talking with Ken. So it's even possible that Biffin is the one who could have added the detail, not Ken himself." Now, this theory is of course extremely interesting and raises a lot of good questions about the case. But as with every other theory, it is lacking in any hard evidence and relies solely on conjecture and speculation alone. However, I will say this. In my own personal research, I have not been able to find any images or videos of Ken Elliot, despite his heavy involvement in the case. Now, this may just be down to my poor investigative skills, but to be fair, I have seen several references to interviews he has given in the past, but every web link seems to be broken. Also, I feel like as he was the key witness in this case, it should be a lot easier to find a picture of him. And so it's been extremely difficult to research this theory outside of the Reddit post alone. So, you are free to interpret this information as you wish. But anyway, this along with the other inconclusive theories is precisely why it's so concerning that after 2 long years, we are still no closer to finding out the truth. One thing that is for sure, however, is that Daniel's father, David Robinson, is still desperate to get justice for his son. In his own words, there is no peace without justice. And so until we find out what truly happened to Daniel Robinson, David will never stop searching. He feels that the Buckeye PD did not act quickly enough, as they refused to let David report his son as missing until 12 hours had passed. These 12 hours may have made a huge difference given that the first 48 hours of any missing person case are usually the most crucial. To make matters worse, according to David, this decision by the Buckeye PD went against their very own policy, as they should have acted as soon as possible. Also, a helicopter search was conducted almost 3 days after Daniel was first reported as missing, which may have already been too late. If the police had acted faster, we may have been able to resolve this case a lot sooner, but here we are, over 2 years later, with no justice. Now, we can't blame the Buckeye PD entirely for Daniel's disappearance. However, in David's opinion, they have certainly mishandled this case. He wants them to release it to an outside agency that will be more effective, as over the past 2 years of investigating, it would appear there have been no significant updates. They haven't released any traffic camera footage, cell phone pings, or any kind of information that may lead to locating Daniel's whereabouts. Also, rather suspiciously, Daniel's car possessed a piece of software called Uconnect, which should have uncovered the route Daniel took the day he went missing, but apparently nothing ever came of this. It would seem that anything that could help in getting to the bottom of this mystery is being purposely blocked by the Buckeye PD, and they are also now refusing to allow other agencies access to the case. In David's words, we need a second opinion to get things going in the right direction so we can finally get some answers. Now, as this is a case I've only just started researching in depth, I would assume there are reasons for the Buckeye PD's lack of transparency here. However, as it's now been 2 years since Daniel's disappearance with absolutely no useful updates, I see no rational explanation for the police to not only withhold information, but to prevent other agencies from having a look. To me, this raises suspicion, and although I usually prefer to give everybody the benefit of the doubt in these situations, I can't seem to comprehend why there is such a lack of transparency here. It would be useful to get another update directly from the Buckeye PD themselves, at least to publicly announce that they are still working hard on the case, because right now it just seems like they've come to a brick wall in their investigation, but are too proud to let another team take a crack at it. Now, this is just my opinion, of course, which is based on the information available to me, so I apologise if I have got this wrong. But when I put myself in the shoes of David Robinson, who is desperately trying to find answers for his son, I can't help but feel frustrated that more hasn't been done in this case. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here, but please let me know what you think in the comments, as I'd love to somehow get to the bottom of this mystery. Hopefully this video will gain enough exposure to help bring some more awareness to the 2-year-old case, so make sure to show David your support on the official Daniel Robinson website, or his GoFundMe page, as he's been working incredibly hard to find justice for his son and certainly deserves some recognition. Also, as I mentioned at the start of this video, this case does seem to have a few similarities to the recent disappearances of Johannes Kadani and Jared Shadid, so if you're interested, make sure to check out those videos on screen now.